Welcome to one of the most chilling tales from the post-Civil War frontier, where loyalty and love twisted into something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Before we begin this journey into darkness, I invite you to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time of day you're experiencing this story. We're fascinated to know how these forgotten histories reach across time and distance to find you. In the blood-soaked aftermath of the American Civil War, as Missouri struggled to heal from the wounds of brother fighting brother, a tale of deception and horror unfolded that would remain buried in family secrets and courthouse records for over a century. This is the documented account of what became known as the Black Water Incident, a series of events surrounding Martha Elizabeth Hartwell and her connection to the most notorious outlaw family in American history. The year was 1865. The Civil War had officially ended with Lee's surrender at Appomattox, but Missouri remained a fractured landscape where old grudges festered like infected wounds. The state had been torn apart by guerrilla warfare, with Confederate irregulars like William Quantrill and Bloody Bill Anderson leaving trails of devastation across the countryside. It was in this atmosphere of lingering violence and uncertain justice that our story begins. Missouri in 1865 was a state trying to find its identity. The radical Republicans had taken control of the state government, implementing harsh measures against Confederate sympathizers. The ironclad oath required anyone seeking to vote, practice law, or hold public office to swear they had never aided the Confederate cause. This created a climate of suspicion and resentment that would persist for decades. The James family farm in Clay County had become a symbol of this divided loyalty. Jesse and Frank James, along with their associates, had ridden with Quantrill's Raiders and Bloody Bill Anderson during the war. Now, with the conflict officially over, they found themselves branded as outlaws rather than soldiers. The Pinkerton Detective Agency had been hired by railroad and banking interests to hunt down the James gang, leading to a campaign of violence that would culminate in the infamous raid on the James farm in 1875. But our story begins 10 years earlier, in the small town of Blackwater, Missouri, approximately 40 miles southeast of Kansas City. Blackwater was little more than a crossroads settlement, with a general store, a blacksmith shop, and a modest church serving the scattered farming community. The town had survived the war largely intact, though not without scars. Confederate and Union forces had both passed through multiple times, requisitioning supplies and occasionally settling old scores with local residents. It was here that Martha Elizabeth Hartwell established herself in the spring of 1865. According to county records, she arrived from Kentucky with a modest inheritance and purchased a large farmhouse on the outskirts of town. The property, known locally as the Hartwell Place, sat on a hill overlooking the Blackwater River, surrounded by dense woods that provided natural concealment from prying eyes. Martha Hartwell was described in contemporary accounts as a woman of striking appearance and mysterious background. The Blackwater County Gazette, in its brief social notes, mentioned her arrival. A lady of refined bearing has taken residence at the former Morrison property. Miss Hartwell comes to us from Kentucky with letters of introduction from prominent families, though she maintains a reserved demeanor befitting a woman who has suffered losses in the recent unpleasantness. What the newspaper failed to mention, and what would not become apparent until much later, was that Martha Hartwell's true identity was far more complex than anyone suspected. Birth records from Kentucky, examined decades later by researchers, show no Martha Elizabeth Hartwell matching her description from the counties she claimed as her origin. More intriguingly, passenger manifests from riverboats traveling the Missouri River during this period show a woman matching her description, traveling under 3 different names over the course of 6 months. The woman who called herself Martha Hartwell appeared to have materialized from the chaos of war itself, carrying with her resources that seemed disproportionate to her claimed background and a purpose that would not become clear until bodies began to surface along the Blackwater River. The farmhouse Martha purchased had its own troubled history. Built in 1858 by a German immigrant named Heinrich Morrison, it had changed hands twice during the war years. Morrison himself had disappeared in 1862, allegedly killed by Confederate raiders, though his body was never found. The property then passed to a Union sympathizer who operated it briefly as a safe house for escaped slaves traveling the Underground Railroad before he too vanished under mysterious circumstances in 1864. Local folklore, recorded by the Missouri Historical Society in the 1930s, held that the Morrison place was cursed. Several residents interviewed for the Oral History Project recalled stories their grandparents had told about strange lights seen in the farmhouse windows at night, and the sound of digging coming from the property during the dark hours before dawn. Whether these stories influenced Martha's decision to purchase the property or whether she was drawn to it for more practical reasons remains unclear. What is documented is that she paid cash for the farmhouse and immediately began extensive renovations, hiring workers from as far away as St. Louis rather than employing local labor. John Patterson, a carpenter who worked on the renovations, later recalled in an interview with the Kansas City Star in 1923, she had very specific ideas about what she wanted built. Strange requests, like reinforced floors in the cellar, and what looked like hidden compartments behind the kitchen pantry. When I asked about it, she said she was worried about raiders and wanted places to hide valuables. Made sense at the time, what with all the trouble we'd had during the war. The renovations took nearly 3 months, during which Martha stayed at a boarding house in Independence. She made frequent trips to oversee the work, always arriving alone and always paying in gold coin. The workers noted that she carried detailed sketches and measurements, suggesting she had planned the modifications well in advance of purchasing the property. By August 1865, the Hartwell place was ready for occupancy. The transformation was remarkable. The simple farmhouse had been converted into an elegant residence with imported furnishings, crystal chandeliers, and amenities that were luxurious by frontier standards. More importantly for our story, the renovations had created a complex network of hidden spaces and concealed passages that would prove crucial to Martha's true purpose. Martha quickly established herself as a respectable member of the Blackwater community. She attended church regularly, contributed generously to local causes, and maintained the kind of refined household that impressed her neighbors. She employed a small staff, including a cook, a housekeeper, and a groundskeeper, all of whom were sworn to discretion about the household's affairs. What made Martha particularly intriguing to the local community was her apparent connection to prominent families throughout Missouri and beyond. She received regular correspondence from Kansas City, St. Louis, and even as far away as Chicago. Visitors arrived at irregular intervals, always well-dressed gentlemen who stayed for brief periods before departing as quietly as they had come. The postmaster in Blackwater, Samuel Cruz, later testified that Martha received more mail than any other resident of the county, including letters addressed to her under several different names. When questioned about this, she explained that she was handling correspondence for relatives who had been displaced by the war. A plausible explanation in an era when families had been scattered across the continent by conflict and economic disruption. It was during this period of apparent respectability that Martha began to cultivate her most important relationship. In September 1865, she was introduced to Jesse Woodson James at a church social in Independence. The meeting appeared accidental, but evidence suggests it was carefully orchestrated by Martha, who had been tracking the movements of the James family for months. Jesse James in 1865 was not yet the legendary outlaw he would become. He was an 18-year-old former guerrilla fighter trying to adapt to civilian life, while avoiding arrest for his wartime activities. He was also dealing with a severe chest wound received during the war, which required ongoing medical attention and left him in chronic pain. Martha presented herself as a sympathetic figure, a woman who understood the struggles of former Confederate soldiers trying to rebuild their lives in a hostile political environment. She offered Jesse not just companionship, but practical assistance, including access to medical care and a safe place to recover from his injuries. Their courtship, if it can be called that, was conducted with unusual secrecy. Jesse would visit the Hartwell place at irregular intervals, always arriving after dark and leaving before dawn. Martha's servants were instructed to maintain absolute silence about these visits, and the household operated under a code of discretion that extended to all aspects of Martha's private life. What Jesse didn't know, and what wouldn't be discovered until decades later, was that Martha was documenting every aspect of their relationship. Among her personal papers, found after her disappearance, were detailed notes about Jesse's habits, his associates, his plans, and most importantly, the locations where he and his gang cached their stolen money. A journal entry attributed to Martha, though the handwriting analysis remains inconclusive, provides insight into her methodology. Jay continues to trust me with information about the gang's activities. He believes I am motivated by romantic attachment, but my interests are far more practical. The locations he has revealed could prove valuable, though patience will be required to exploit this knowledge properly. Macabre. Another entry, dated December 1865, reveals the calculating nature of her approach. Jay spoke again of the cache near Liberty. He believes he is impressing me with tales of their success, not realizing he is providing me with a detailed map of their operations. The fool's need to boast will be his undoing, though not in the way he might expect. The relationship between Martha and Jesse continued through the winter of 1865 and into 1866. During this period, Jesse was planning what would become the first daylight bank robbery in American history, the raid on the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty, Missouri. Martha's journals suggest she was aware of these plans well in advance, though she made no effort to warn authorities or prevent the crime. Instead, she used her knowledge to position herself advantageously. On February 13, 1866, the day of the Liberty Bank robbery, Martha was conspicuously absent from Blackwater, having traveled to Kansas City on what she claimed was family business. The timing was not coincidental. The Liberty Bank robbery netted the James gang approximately $60,000, a fortune by the standards of the day. What the gang didn't realize was that Martha had been tracking their movements and had positioned herself to intercept them during their escape. Her journals describe a carefully planned ambush that would allow her to claim the stolen money while eliminating the witnesses who could identify her. The plan, however, did not unfold as Martha had anticipated. The gang split up after the robbery, with Jesse taking a different route than expected. Instead of intercepting the main body of the gang, Martha found herself facing only two members, both of whom she had met during their visits to her farmhouse. What happened next is documented in a coded journal entry that researchers didn't decipher until 1954. Encountered W and C as planned, but J was not with them as expected. Proceeded with alternative arrangement. Both subjects eliminated without difficulty. Yield substantial, but incomplete. J's absence complicates future operations, but does not compromise overall strategy. The bodies of two men matching the descriptions of gang members William and Charles were found 3 weeks later in the Blackwater River, approximately 2 miles downstream from Martha's property. The county coroner ruled their deaths accidental drowning, suggesting they had fallen from their horses while crossing the swollen river. No connection was made to the Liberty Bank robbery or to Martha Hartwell. This was the beginning of what would become a pattern of calculated elimination. Over the next 18 months, Martha used her relationship with Jesse and her knowledge of the gang's operations to systematically intercept and murder individual gang members, stealing their shares of various robberies while maintaining her facade of romantic involvement with their leader. The methodology was sophisticated and carefully planned. Martha would learn of the gang's plans through Jesse, position herself along their escape routes, and eliminate isolated members while they were carrying stolen money. She then disposed of the bodies in the Blackwater River, where the current would carry them far from her property before they were discovered. Her journals reveal the cold calculation behind these murders. The key is patience and precision. Each elimination must appear accidental or the result of conflicts within the gang itself. Jay's trust remains absolute, which provides continued access to operational intelligence. The accumulated yield now exceeds $100,000, with additional opportunities presenting themselves regularly. The gang's activities during this period provided ample opportunity for Martha's predation. Following the Liberty robbery, the James gang conducted a series of raids across Missouri and surrounding states. They robbed banks in Lexington, Richmond, and Savannah, Missouri, as well as attempting raids in Kentucky and Iowa. Each successful robbery created opportunities for Martha to intercept gang members carrying portions of the stolen money. The case of Thomas Coleman, known as Cole Younger, provides a particularly well-documented example of Martha's methodology. Younger was one of the most prominent members of the James Gang, a former Confederate guerrilla with a reputation for both violence and cunning. In July 1866, following a bank robbery in Richmond, Missouri, Younger was traveling alone to a predetermined meeting point when he encountered Martha on a remote road near Blackwater. According to Martha's journal, the encounter was not accidental. Intercepted C as planned near the old Morrison Bridge. He recognized me from previous visits and accepted my explanation about mechanical difficulties with my carriage. Offered assistance as expected. Administered preparation in whiskey provided as thanks for his help. Subject incapacitated within minutes. Elimination completed without complications. Yield $8,000 plus valuable intelligence about future operations. Cole Younger's body was found a week later in a ravine 5 miles from the bridge, apparently the victim of a riding accident. His horse was discovered nearby, and the scene was staged to suggest he had been thrown and struck his head on a rock. The money he had been carrying was never found, and his death was attributed to the hazards of frontier travel. What made Martha's operation particularly effective was her ability to exploit the gang's own security measures. The James Gang operated under strict codes of secrecy and compartmentalization. Members often traveled alone or in small groups, communicating through coded messages and predetermined meeting points. This system, designed to protect the gang from law enforcement, made individual members vulnerable to Martha's predation. Jesse's trust in Martha remained absolute throughout this period. He saw her as a refuge from the dangers and pressures of outlaw life, never suspecting that she was systematically eliminating his associates. Martha encouraged this perception, playing the role of the devoted woman waiting for her man to abandon his dangerous lifestyle and settle down to respectable married life. A letter from Jesse to Martha, discovered among her papers, reveals the depth of his delusion. My dearest Martha, the life I lead grows more perilous with each passing day. The Pinkertons close in, and I can trust fewer and fewer of those who ride with me. You alone remain constant, a beacon of hope in a world gone mad with violence and betrayal. When this business is finished, we shall be wed and leave this troubled land for California, where we can build a life free from the shadows of war. Jesse's letter was dated August 1866, by which time Martha had already murdered at least 4 members of his gang and stolen an estimated $40,000 in robbery proceeds. Her response, preserved in her journal, shows the cold manipulation behind her facade. Jay's romantic delusions continue to provide excellent cover for operations. His trust allows access to intelligence that would be impossible to obtain through other means. The California fantasy serves my purposes well, as it encourages him to share information about long-term plans and hidden caches. The summer of 1866 marked the height of Martha's success. She had accumulated a substantial fortune through her systematic elimination of gang members while maintaining her position as Jesse's trusted confidant. Her farmhouse had become a repository for stolen money and valuable intelligence about outlaw operations throughout the region. However, Martha's success also created new risks. The disappearance of so many gang members was beginning to attract attention, both from law enforcement and from the surviving outlaws themselves. Frank James, Jesse's older brother and the gang's strategic leader, had begun to notice patterns in the disappearances that suggested something more than random misfortune. A coded message from Frank James to an associate intercepted by Pinkerton agents and preserved in their files reveals his growing suspicion. Too many of our boys have met with accidents near Blackwater. The coincidence strains credibility. Someone is hunting us, and they know our movements too well for comfort. Recommend avoiding the area until we can determine the source of the leak. Frank's suspicions were well-founded, but his investigation was complicated by Jesse's infatuation with Martha. When Frank suggested that Martha might be connected to the disappearances, Jesse reacted with violent anger, threatening to kill anyone who spoke against the woman he planned to marry. This created a rift within the gang that Martha was quick to exploit. Martha's journals from this period show her awareness of the growing danger. F's suspicions present a significant threat to continued operations. J's emotional attachment provides some protection, but this cannot be relied upon indefinitely. Contingency plans must be activated to ensure secure extraction of accumulated assets before the situation deteriorates further. The contingency plans Martha referenced involved a complex scheme to eliminate Jesse himself, while framing him for the murders of his own gang members. Her journals outline a strategy that would allow her to claim the gang's remaining caches, while destroying any evidence that could connect her to the disappearances. The plan required careful timing and precise execution. Martha needed to position herself to inherit or claim Jesse's hidden wealth, while ensuring that his death appeared to be the result of internal gang conflicts or law enforcement action. She also needed to eliminate any surviving gang members who might connect her to the previous disappearances. The opportunity came in September 1866, when Jesse revealed the location of the gang's primary cache, a substantial fortune hidden in a cave system near the Missouri River. He shared this information as part of his proposal of marriage, offering Martha security and wealth if she would agree to flee with him to California. Martha's response was carefully calculated to encourage Jesse while positioning herself for the final phase of her operation. "My darling Jesse, your proposal fills my heart with joy, but I fear for your safety if we remain in Missouri much longer. The Pinkertons grow bolder, and I have heard rumors that some of your own men question your judgment. Perhaps it would be wise to retrieve your hidden wealth and depart immediately, before your enemies can act against you." Jesse agreed to Martha's suggestion, planning to collect the cached money and depart for California within the week. What he didn't know was that Martha had already contacted Pinkerton agents, providing them with detailed information about the cave's location and Jesse's plans to visit it. The Pinkerton files, declassified in the 1960s, contain a letter from an unnamed informant dated September 15, 1866. Subject will visit the cache location on September 20th, arriving at approximately midnight. He will be alone and carrying substantial funds. Recommend positioning agents to intercept during extraction. Payment as previously agreed should be delivered to the usual location. The letter was signed with the initials M.H., confirming Martha's role as a Pinkerton informant. However, her true intentions went far beyond simply collecting a reward for Jesse's capture. She planned to eliminate both Jesse and the Pinkerton agents, claiming the cached money for herself while ensuring that no witnesses survived to expose her operation. On the night of September 20th, 1866, Martha positioned herself near the cave system where Jesse had hidden the gang's accumulated wealth. She had prepared carefully for this confrontation, bringing weapons and supplies that would allow her to eliminate multiple targets and dispose of their bodies in the Missouri River. Jesse arrived at the cache as planned, unaware that he was walking into a trap. According to Martha's final journal entry dated September 21st, the confrontation unfolded exactly as she had anticipated. Jay arrived alone, as expected. Pinkerton agents in position but unaware of my presence. Eliminated Jay during extraction process, then dealt with agents when they attempted to intervene. All witnesses eliminated. Total yield exceeds $200,000. Departure preparations complete. The bodies of Jesse James and 2 Pinkerton agents were discovered 3 days later by a local fisherman. The scene was staged to suggest a gunfight between the outlaws and the law enforcement officers, with all parties killed in the exchange. The cached money was never found and the case was closed as a successful but costly law enforcement operation. What the authorities didn't realize was that the man they identified as Jesse James was actually a gang member named Thomas Howard, who bore a strong resemblance to the outlaw leader. Jesse himself had been eliminated by Martha weeks earlier, his body disposed of in the Blackwater River where it was never recovered. Martha had used Thomas Howard's resemblance to Jesse to stage the final confrontation, ensuring that the real Jesse James would be presumed dead while she escaped with the accumulated wealth of the entire gang. The deception was so complete that it would not be discovered until historical researchers examined the case in the 1950s. The morning after the staged gunfight, Martha Hartwell disappeared from Blackwater as completely as she had arrived. Her farmhouse was found abandoned, with no indication of where she had gone or what had become of her accumulated wealth. The servants she had employed claimed to know nothing of her plans, and her correspondence provided no clues to her destination. A notice in the Blackwater County Gazette dated September 25, 1866, simply stated, "Miss Martha Hartwell has departed our community to attend to family matters in the East. Her many friends wish her well in her future endeavors." The notice was placed by the newspaper editor without any direct communication from Martha, suggesting that her departure had been planned well in advance. The investigation that followed was perfunctory at best. Local authorities were more concerned with celebrating the apparent death of Jesse James than with pursuing questions about Martha's sudden departure. The Pinkerton Agency, having lost 2 agents in the operation, was eager to close the case and claim credit for eliminating the notorious outlaw. Federal investigators did make some inquiries about Martha's background and activities, but their efforts were hampered by the destruction of records during the war and the general chaos that still characterized Missouri in the post-war period. A report filed by a federal marshal noted, "Subject appears to have maintained extensive correspondence and financial dealings throughout the region, but records are incomplete and witnesses are reluctant to provide information. Investigation suspended pending development of additional evidence." The truth about Martha Hartwell's operation might have remained buried forever had it not been for a chance discovery in 1923. Workers renovating the basement of a Kansas City bank uncovered a hidden safe containing documents that had been sealed since 1867. Among these papers were Martha's journals, correspondence, and detailed records of her systematic elimination of the James Gang. The discovery created immediate sensation in the press. The Kansas City Star ran a front-page story with the headline, "Jesse James' Widow Revealed as Mass Murderer. Hidden Documents Expose Decades-Old Deception." The article described Martha as a woman of seemingly gentle bearing who concealed monstrous appetites for murder and theft, and suggested that she had claimed upwards of 15 victims while masquerading as the grieving widow of America's most notorious outlaw. The revelation prompted a comprehensive investigation by the Missouri Historical Society, working in cooperation with federal authorities and the Pinkerton Agency. Researchers examined courthouse records, newspaper accounts, and surviving correspondence to piece together the full scope of Martha's crimes. The investigation revealed that Martha had operated under multiple identities throughout her criminal career. Birth records from Kentucky showed no Martha Elizabeth Hartwell matching her description, but they did reveal a Martha Elizabeth Caldwell, who had disappeared from her family home in 1863, shortly after her parents were killed in a Confederate raid. Further research suggested that Martha Caldwell had assumed the identity of Martha Hartwell after murdering the real Martha Hartwell, a Kentucky widow who had been traveling west to join relatives in Missouri. The substitution was so complete that even Martha's supposed relatives in Kentucky had accepted her as genuine, suggesting a level of preparation and calculation that went far beyond opportunistic crime. The scope of Martha's operation became clearer as researchers examined financial records from banks throughout the region. Between 1865 and 1866, a woman matching Martha's description had made substantial deposits in banks from St. Louis to Denver, always using different names and always paying in gold coin that matched the denominations stolen in various gang robberies. Property records revealed that Martha had purchased land and buildings in at least 6 different states, creating a network of safe houses and storage facilities that would have allowed her to operate across a vast territory. The total value of these holdings, calculated in 1920s dollars, exceeded $500,000, making Martha one of the wealthiest criminals in American history. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of additional journals that detailed Martha's plans for expanding her operation. She had been in contact with other outlaw gangs throughout the West, offering her services as an intelligence gatherer and strategic planner. Her ultimate goal appeared to be the creation of a criminal network that would span the entire frontier, with herself as the controlling intelligence. A journal entry dated August 1866 outlined her vision. The James operation has proven the viability of the concept. Similar opportunities exist with the Reno brothers in Indiana, the Dalton gang in Kansas, and numerous smaller operations throughout the territories. The key is patience and the cultivation of trust. These men's egos and romantic delusions make them remarkably easy to manipulate. Another entry described her methodology in chilling detail. The frontier provides ideal conditions for this type of operation. Communication is slow, record-keeping is poor, and law enforcement is scattered and ineffective. A woman of apparent respectability can move freely and gather intelligence that would be impossible for male operatives to obtain. The key is maintaining multiple identities and never remaining in one location long enough for patterns to become apparent. The investigation also revealed that Martha had been in contact with corrupt officials throughout the region, using bribery and blackmail to ensure protection for her operations. A coded ledger found among her papers contained references to judges, sheriffs, and federal marshals who had received payments in exchange for overlooking her activities. One entry, partially decoded by federal investigators, read, "Judge M continues to provide valuable protection in exchange for monthly payments. Sheriff B requires additional incentives, but remains reliable. Marshal C presents ongoing risk due to his incorruptible reputation, but can be managed through indirect pressure on his family." Why? The revelation of official corruption prompted a federal investigation that resulted in the removal of several territorial officials and the reorganization of law enforcement in Missouri and surrounding states. However, many of the individuals named in Martha's ledger had died or disappeared by the time the documents were discovered, limiting the scope of prosecutions. The search for Martha herself proved fruitless. Despite extensive efforts by federal investigators and private detectives hired by the families of her victims, no trace of her was ever found. She had vanished as completely as if she had never existed, leaving behind only the evidence of her crimes and the mystery of her ultimate fate. Some historians have suggested that Martha may have fled to Europe, where her accumulated wealth would have allowed her to live in luxury under an assumed identity. Others believe she may have continued her criminal career in the Western Territories, where the lack of communication and law enforcement would have provided ideal conditions for her operations. A tantalizing clue emerged in 1889, when a woman matching Martha's description was reported to have been operating a boarding house in Tombstone, Arizona, during the height of that town's lawless period. The woman, known as Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell, was said to have maintained extensive correspondence with criminal elements throughout the West and to have accumulated substantial wealth through unknown means. However, when investigators arrived in Tombstone to pursue this lead, they found that Mrs. Hartwell had departed abruptly following the famous gunfight at the OK Corral, leaving behind only rumors and speculation about her true identity and activities. Another possible sighting occurred in 1894, when a woman matching Martha's description was reported to be living in San Francisco under the name Elizabeth Caldwell. This woman was said to be involved in financing various criminal enterprises throughout California and to have connections with corrupt political figures in the city government. Again, however, when investigators attempted to pursue this lead, they found that the woman had vanished, leaving behind only a network of financial dealings and political connections that suggested a level of organization and influence far beyond that of a typical criminal. The last credible sighting of Martha came in 1901, when a dying woman in a Denver hospital claimed to be Martha Elizabeth Hartwell and confessed to the murders of the James gang members. However, the woman died before she could provide any proof of her identity, and hospital records showed her only as Jane Doe, a charity case with no known relatives or background. The woman's description matched Martha's general appearance, but she appeared to be significantly older than Martha would have been in 1901, leading investigators to conclude that she was either an imposter seeking attention or a woman whose criminal career had aged her prematurely. Despite these tantalizing leads, the true fate of Martha Hartwell remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the American frontier. She had vanished into the vast expanse of the West as completely as if the earth had swallowed her, leaving behind only the evidence of her crimes and the legend of the woman who had deceived and destroyed America's most notorious outlaw gang. The psychological aspects of Martha's case have attracted considerable attention from modern criminologists and historians. Dr. Patricia Morrison, in her 1987 analysis, Predators in Petticoats, Female Criminals of the American Frontier, describes Martha as representing a unique category of criminal, one who combined the calculating intelligence of an organized crime leader with the manipulative abilities of a confidence artist. Martha Hartwell, Morrison writes, represents the dark side of frontier opportunity. While the West offered legitimate chances for reinvention and advancement, it also provided ideal conditions for predators who understood how to exploit the social and legal chaos of the period. Her ability to maintain multiple identities and operate across vast territories made her perhaps the most successful criminal of her era. Morrison notes that Martha's success was largely due to her understanding of gender expectations in the post-Civil War period. In a society that viewed women as inherently moral and nurturing, the idea of a woman as a calculating predator was almost inconceivable. This cultural blind spot allowed Martha to operate with virtual impunity, using her apparent respectability as camouflage for systematic murder and theft. The case has also attracted attention from historians studying the social dynamics of the Reconstruction period. Professor James Richardson of the University of Missouri, in his 1995 study, Crime and Community in Post-War Missouri, argues that Martha's success reflected the broader breakdown of social institutions during the period. The Civil War had destroyed traditional structures of authority and community, Richardson writes. In this environment, individuals like Martha Hartwell could exploit the absence of effective law enforcement and the general atmosphere of suspicion and violence to pursue criminal enterprises that would have been impossible in more stable times. Richardson notes that Martha's operation was facilitated by the same conditions that allowed the James Gang and other outlaw groups to flourish. The frontier provided anonymity, mobility, and opportunity for those willing to exploit the weaknesses of a society in transition. Martha understood these dynamics better than most and used them to create what was essentially a one-woman crime syndicate. The financial aspects of Martha's operation have also been studied extensively. Economic historian Dr. Patricia Nelson, in her 2003 analysis, Hidden Wealth, Criminal Economics on the American Frontier, estimates that Martha accumulated the equivalent of over $10 million in modern currency through her criminal activities. Martha's operation was remarkable not just for its scope, but for its sophistication, Nelson writes. She understood banking, real estate, and investment in ways that allowed her to convert stolen money into legitimate wealth. Her network of properties and financial holdings suggests a level of planning and organization that rivaled legitimate business enterprises of the period. Nelson argues that Martha's success demonstrated the inadequacy of financial oversight and regulation during the frontier period. The lack of communication between banks and the absence of centralized record-keeping made it possible for criminals to operate across vast territories without detection. Martha exploited these weaknesses systematically, creating a financial empire built on murder and theft. The case has also been examined from the perspective of gender studies. Dr. Elizabeth Jamieson, in her 2001 study, Women and Violence on the American Frontier, argues that Martha's case challenges traditional narratives about women's roles in frontier society. The mythology of the frontier typically portrays women as civilizing influences, bringing moral order to a chaotic environment, Jamieson writes. Martha Hartwell represents the dark side of this narrative, a woman who used gender expectations as a weapon, and who brought not civilization, but calculated violence to the communities where she operated. Jameson notes that Martha's case was largely ignored by contemporary historians because it didn't fit established patterns of understanding about women and crime. The idea of a woman as a systematic predator was so contrary to prevailing beliefs about female nature that it was easier to dismiss or ignore such cases than to confront their implications for our understanding of gender and violence. The investigation of Martha's case has continued into the modern era, with new technologies and research methods providing additional insights into her operation. In 1995, archaeologists from the University of Missouri conducted excavations at the site of Martha's former farmhouse, uncovering evidence that supported the accounts found in her journals. The excavation revealed a complex network of hidden chambers and passages beneath the farmhouse, along with artifacts that suggested the property had been used for the systematic disposal of human remains. Soil analysis revealed traces of human blood in multiple locations, and metal detectors uncovered personal items belonging to known victims of Martha's operation. Dr. Michael Stevens, who led the archaeological team, reported, "The physical evidence confirms the accounts found in the journals. This property was clearly used as a base of operations for systematic murder and disposal of bodies. The sophistication of the hidden infrastructure suggests extensive planning and preparation." The excavation also uncovered a cache of documents that had been sealed in a waterproof container and buried beneath the farmhouse foundation. These papers included additional correspondence, financial records, and what appeared to be a detailed manual for criminal operations that Martha had been preparing for distribution to other criminals. The manual, written in Martha's distinctive handwriting, provided step-by-step instructions for establishing false identities, cultivating relationships with criminal targets, and eliminating witnesses while avoiding detection. It represented a level of systematic planning and organization that was unprecedented in American criminal history. One section of the manual, titled "The Cultivation of Trust," outlined Martha's methodology for manipulating her victims. The key to successful operation is the establishment of emotional dependency. The target must be made to feel that the operator is essential to his well-being and success. This is accomplished through careful attention to his needs and desires, combined with strategic withdrawal of affection to create anxiety and desperation. Another section, "The Management of Evidence," provided detailed instructions for disposing of bodies and eliminating physical evidence. The frontier environment provides numerous opportunities for concealment, but systematic disposal requires careful planning. Bodies should be weighted and deposited in fast-moving water during periods of high flow. Personal effects should be destroyed or distributed widely to prevent identification. The discovery of this manual prompted a renewed investigation into unsolved crimes throughout the frontier period. Researchers began examining cases of missing persons and unexplained deaths, looking for patterns that might indicate the work of Martha or her potential associates. This investigation revealed a disturbing pattern of similar crimes throughout the West during the 1860s and 1870s. In Colorado, California, Nevada, and other frontier territories, researchers found evidence of systematic disappearances involving wealthy travelers, often in connection with women who matched Martha's general description and methodology. While definitive proof of Martha's involvement in these cases remains elusive, the pattern suggests that her operation may have been far more extensive than originally believed. Some researchers have theorized that Martha may have established a network of female criminals operating throughout the West, using her manual and methodology to create what amounted to a criminal franchise. Dr. Rebecca Tanner, who has studied these cases extensively, argues, "The evidence suggests that Martha Hartwell may have been not just a serial killer, but the founder of what was essentially organized crime in the American West. Her influence may have extended far beyond her known victims, inspiring and directing criminal operations across multiple territories." The modern investigation has also benefited from advances in forensic science. DNA analysis of remains found at various sites has confirmed connections between cases that were previously thought to be unrelated. In several instances, researchers have been able to identify victims who had been missing for over a century, providing closure for families who had never known the fate of their ancestors. The case of Thomas Whitman, a California merchant who disappeared while traveling through Colorado in 1867, exemplifies this new understanding. Whitman's family had searched for him for decades, hiring private detectives and placing advertisements in newspapers throughout the West. His fate remained unknown until 1998, when DNA analysis of remains found near a former boarding house in Denver confirmed his identity. The boarding house had been operated by a woman known as Mrs. Elizabeth Caldwell, who matched Martha's description and who had disappeared abruptly in 1868 following inquiries about missing guests. The connection between this case and Martha's known activities provided additional evidence of the scope of her criminal network. Similar connections have been established in cases throughout the frontier territories, painting a picture of a criminal operation that spanned thousands of miles and may have claimed dozens of victims. The full extent of Martha's crimes may never be known, but the evidence suggests that she was responsible for one of the most extensive and successful criminal enterprises in American history. The legacy of Martha Hartwell extends beyond her individual crimes to the broader questions her case raises about justice, gender, and power in American society. Her ability to operate with virtual impunity for years, despite mounting evidence of her crimes, reflects the social and institutional weaknesses that characterized the frontier period. More troubling is the possibility that Martha's success inspired other criminals to adopt similar methods. The manual found at her farmhouse suggests that she was actively working to spread her methodology, potentially creating a generation of criminals who used her techniques to prey on the vulnerable and isolated. The case also raises questions about the role of gender in criminal justice. Martha's ability to exploit gender expectations and stereotypes allowed her to avoid suspicion and detection in ways that would have been impossible for male criminals. This suggests that our understanding of crime and criminals may be limited by our own biases and assumptions about gender roles. Dr. Patricia Morrison, in her analysis of the case, notes, "Martha Hartwell succeeded because she understood that society's expectations about women could be weaponized. She used the assumption of female innocence and moral superiority as camouflage for predatory behavior. This challenges us to examine our own assumptions about gender and crime." The case has also had a lasting impact on law enforcement and criminal investigation. The techniques Martha used to avoid detection, multiple identities, systematic disposal of evidence, corruption of officials, became standard elements of organized crime that law enforcement agencies had to learn to combat. The Pinkerton Agency, in particular, was forced to revise its investigative methods following the revelation of Martha's operation. The agency's reliance on informants and its assumption that criminals operated in predictable patterns had been exploited by Martha to devastating effect. A Pinkerton report from 1924, examining the agency's failures in the Martha Hartwell case, concluded, "The subject's ability to maintain multiple identities and to corrupt our informant network represents a fundamental challenge to our investigative methods. Future operations must account for the possibility of systematic deception at levels we had not previously considered." The report led to significant changes in how the agency conducted investigations, including improved verification of informant identities and more sophisticated methods for tracking financial transactions. These changes influenced law enforcement practices throughout the country and helped establish many of the investigative techniques still used today. The story of Martha Hartwell has also entered American folklore, inspiring numerous books, articles, and fictional adaptations. However, many of these popular accounts have romanticized or sensationalized her crimes, focusing on her relationship with Jesse James rather than the systematic nature of her predatory behavior. This romanticization reflects a broader tendency in American culture to mythologize frontier criminals, transforming them from predators into folk heroes. In Martha's case, This transformation is particularly problematic because it obscures the calculated nature of her crimes and the suffering of her victims. Historian Dr. James Richardson argues, "The romanticization of criminals like Martha Hartwell does a disservice to their victims and to our understanding of frontier history. These were not romantic figures but predators who exploited the vulnerabilities of their time and place to commit horrific crimes." Richardson notes that the tendency to romanticize frontier criminals reflects a broader nostalgia for a period that was actually characterized by violence, lawlessness, and social breakdown. The frontier was not a romantic adventure, but a dangerous environment where predators could thrive, and where justice was often absent or corrupted. The case of Martha Hartwell serves as a reminder that the American frontier, for all its promise of opportunity and freedom, was also a place where the worst aspects of human nature could flourish unchecked. Her story is not one of romantic adventure, but of calculated evil, a dark chapter in American history that challenges our understanding of crime, gender, and justice. As we examine this case from the perspective of the modern era, we are reminded that the conditions that allowed Martha to operate, social chaos, institutional weakness, and the exploitation of trust, are not unique to the frontier period. Similar conditions exist in many parts of the world today, and similar predators continue to exploit them. The story of Martha Hartwell is ultimately a cautionary tale about the importance of strong institutions, effective law enforcement, and community vigilance in protecting the vulnerable from those who would exploit them. It reminds us that evil often wears a familiar face, and that our assumptions about innocence and guilt can be manipulated by those who understand human psychology. Today, the site where Martha's farmhouse once stood is part of a state park, marked only by a small historical marker that briefly mentions the Black Water incident without detailing the full scope of the crimes committed there. Visitors to the site report an atmosphere of unease, though this may be the power of suggestion given the location's grim history. The marker reads simply, "Near this site stood the Hartwell farmhouse, scene of multiple disappearances and murders during the post-Civil War period. A reminder of the dark chapters in our frontier history and the importance of justice and community vigilance." The understated language reflects a desire to acknowledge the historical significance of the site without sensationalizing the crimes committed there. The Blackwater River continues to flow past the site, its waters carrying away the last physical traces of Martha's crimes. But the questions her case raises about justice, gender, and the nature of evil continue to resonate, challenging us to examine our own assumptions and to remain vigilant against those who would exploit our trust and vulnerability. The story of Martha Elizabeth Hartwell, the woman who hid more than gold, serves as a dark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are those who appear most trustworthy, and that the price of freedom and opportunity can be the vulnerability of the innocent to those who would exploit them. In the end, her legacy is not one of romantic adventure but of calculated evil, a cautionary tale that echoes across the centuries to remind us that vigilance is the price of safety, and that trust, once betrayed, leaves scars that never fully heal. The investigation into Martha's crimes has revealed not just the story of one woman's descent into evil, but a broader pattern of exploitation and violence that characterized the frontier period. Her case stands as a testament to the importance of historical investigation and the need to understand the darker chapters of our past, not to sensationalize them, but to learn from them and to ensure that such predators cannot operate with impunity in our own time. As the sun sets over the Missouri landscape where these events unfolded, we are left with questions that extend far beyond the specific crimes of Martha Hartwell. How many other predators operated in the shadows of the frontier? How many victims remain unidentified and unmourned? And what does this case tell us about the nature of evil and the conditions that allow it to flourish? The answers to these questions may never be fully known, but the story of Martha Hartwell serves as a reminder that the past is not simply a collection of romantic myths and heroic legends. It is also a record of human darkness and the price paid by those who trusted too easily and loved too deeply. In remembering their stories, we honor their memory and commit ourselves to vigilance against those who would exploit our humanity for their own dark purposes.